Another very common type of injury, if you will, it's more of a chronic or overuse type injury, is plantar fasciitis. Plantar fasciitis, itis by its term, inflammation, is nothing more than an inflammation of the plantar fascia. Now, the plantar fascia is um, located in the sole of the foot, and it's a fascia-like material that's on the plantar surface of the foot, and that becomes inflamed through overuse. And believe me, I've had plantar fasciitis a couple times, and I've had to stick my foot in a Homer bucket full of ice water to cool it off. I've just had to run through the discomfort. And some people have gone as far as having injections into their foot. And me, I've been fortunate where it's just been a little bit of Homer bucket ice baths, or I've had to do things like roll my foot on a frozen lacrosse ball, which is nice and solid and firm. And I get a medicinal response from just rolling on the cold surface. But this will be another common one you'll come across as practitioners. I left this in here for the gifts. You can see the dorsiflexion, which would be important in running technique, as we'll see. That's nothing more than bringing the toes up towards the shin. And you may recall the mnemonic I said I used with kids is dorsal fin to the shin, dorsal fin to the shin. And the kids seem to remember that when I use the word like a shark. Plantar flexion. And what's quirky, if you may recall about plantar flexion, you have flexion, right? But it's also what? Ankle extension. So it's kind of quirky in terms of the ankle, where you have plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, but you have ankle extension and ankle flexion. So just keep in mind that it's a little bit quirky in that regard. And these I left eversion, and you'll see me do a little bit of eversion, inversion when I do some running technique stuff later on in this presentation. There you go, turning the ankle and footward inward. And usually inversion and eversion come with a certain amount of supination in this case, or pronation going the other way. Toe flexion, and this you'll see used where people will, when they have plantar fasciitis, their practitioner will have them actually put a towel on the floor and use their toes and grip and do toe flexion and grip that toe and try to ball it up as a means to strengthen the muscles on the underside of the foot. Yes, and then the counter to that is toe extension. And toe extension, if I get this gift to fire up here, instead of scrunching the towel, you're spreading your toes, right? So if you've ever had a pedicure, which I have not, but I've seen many of my clients and my wife walk out of the pedicure place, we have those little toe spreaders on there. This would be an example of that. You're spreading your toes out, and you almost can't help have a little bit of ankle articulation in there as well as you extend the toes. See that? They kind of run concurrent. Pronation, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So pronation, you're more on the inside edge of the foot, kind of big toe oriented. Supination, you're on the outside edge of the foot. So again, it's difficult when you look at the musculature, right? You got pollicis here, longus, coming along here, and you look at this and you go, okay, can you have supination without inversion? Can you have pronation without eversion, or vice versa, right? They kind of run together, and it's hard to do one without the other. So this is their way they grouped their musculature. And when you start to look at the way the book did this, it's all right. I like it, and I like the way they kind of broke out the compartments. And they do talk a little bit about anterior compartment syndrome or compartment syndrome, which is more of a rarity, but you might come across that in your practice as well, where you have individuals who have some type of blockage in the venous return in the lower part of the leg, and it ends up swelling the leg. And it's nothing to be messed with. I mean, it's something where if you truly have like a compartment syndrome of some variety, say like anterior compartment syndrome, and you're blocking venous return into the lower leg, it will swell up and you have to get to the hospital quick, or a person could lose their leg. So I would say the amount of times you'll come across this will be rare. You might have a person who will show up and say they've had this, and they're probably on some kind of blood thinner in their post incident. But realize this is a pretty biggie. All right. It explains a little bit further in terms of a cross section right here, posterior, anterior, right, in terms of the different compartments, which is okay. I'm not going to get it too far in depth on this, but just realize in terms of how these muscles kind of operate in terms of the posterior compartment, knee flexion, right, flexus foot, etc., and what actions they have. This part I thought was pretty good. Over here it gets a little bit jumbled, but this is a nice little representation of that. I talked a little bit about compartment syndrome before. Just realize anybody you come across, you'll probably see them after the fact, whether you're a physical therapist or you're a personal trainer, just because this type of, if you will, injury or issue does not just creep up all of a sudden in a session. You know, you'll normally have where a person will have this over time. They'll go to the hospital, go to the doctor, have different tests done, then they'll find that they have this, and they're on some type of medical protocol, and then you'll see them. I'm going to breeze through this. And I talked about shin splints a little bit before, the tibialis anterior, and also you look at, it could be any one of them, right? Tib anterior, extensor digitorum longus, any of those are used in doing dorsiflexion. And as a result, if they're weak, you end up with a bit of a drop foot or slap foot, as it sometimes is called. So there has to be some work done on tibialis anterior. Otherwise, you're going to set your people up to have shin splints. And there's two varieties, right? If you take a person and you tap on the medial side, that bony part, you might hear me tapping on my shin right now. You can tap on the bony part. That's the face of the tibia. The other side, right, the lateral side, that's the beefy muscular part. So if people are experiencing shin splints on the lateral side, you have more of a muscular thing going on. If it's on that medial side and the bony side, they might have some type of micro trauma going on in the actual tibia itself. So kind of a way to differentiate is just to ask, is it medial or lateral? Is it on the muscles, the muscular side, or is it on that bony side? And you can differentiate if there's some type, maybe microfractures in the tibia, they have to send them to a doctor, or if it's something you can do soft tissue wise because it's more medial. All right, I'll keep buzzing through this. I like this in terms of the way they kind of do this cross section. They cut this out in terms of the muscles and the nerves that come down. And I know we've talked, about the different nerve systems that run down the leg and talk about sciatica, and you end up having a different nerve roots themselves. So this is a pretty good representation of that, and I like this a lot. I like the cross section, the way they cut this away. I thought it was pretty good to be able to kind of differentiate different things in the lower leg. Muscles by function, okay, got it, great. Soleus, tibialis anterior, cool. When you look at everters, evert is where you have you're more on the big toe side of the foot. Those are the muscles on the lateral aspect of the lower leg. And they do double duty, right? You'll see this as we go through this process. You're going to have some muscles that are double duty. They're not only everters, but they might be ankle extenders. Got it? Or they might be used in dorsiflexion. All right. So if you look at this, and I focus a ton on these. I focus a lot on tibialis anterior. It tends to runs down more on the medial side of the foot. Extensor digitorum longus and brevis are kind of what I work on a ton when I do running technique stuff with athletes, and you'll see here in the video why. Tibialis anterior, tibialis posterior, blah, blah, blah. You get an idea of what are inverters. As we go a little bit further into the anterior compartment, you can see what's going on here, deep, digitorum longus, tibialis anterior, etc. Got it? So notice how you might have muscles that are used in different areas of flexion, extension, etc., or inversion, eversion, but they are lateral compartment, medial compartment, etc. They're localized to that. So you can kind of categorize these different ways in terms of function, dorsiflexors, inverters, or where they are, anterior compartment, lateral compartment, or they could be in the deep posterior compartment, etc. So different ways to kind of categorize the muscles in the lower leg. With the nerve itself, the sciatic nerve, oftentimes people will have a referred pain down the leg from some type of nerve root dysfunction up in the hip and the low back. And we talked about L5, S1, even further down, S1, S2, being a culprit of that, and it comes out the plexus and down into the leg itself. It's a bit of a challenge sometimes because you have to kind of go on a fishing expedition and kind of deductively work backwards what might be going on. But just kind of look in terms of the tibial division and where it actually starts from, how it runs down into the plexus, down through the thigh, and down into this region of the lower leg, and what it fires, right? So if you know you're having trouble or you're having referred pain in this area, you can kind of denote where and delineate where it comes from. So the sciatic nerve itself, as we mentioned, runs down in through here and here. So again, you have some issue like L5, S1 or S1, S2 in that range, you could have referred pain all the way down into the big toe. So what they're trying to represent here is if you have some type of dysfunction down the common perineal or fibular division of this nerve root, you'll end up having this kind of deadness or tingling down here. And oftentimes, here's the thing, you see this in the sport of MMA. It's a brutal sport, and one of the strategies they'll use is a side leg kick. And a side leg kick is not so much to blow out the knee by applying force laterally, but it's actually to hit this nerve root down the side of the leg and deaden it so the opponent doesn't have the ability to stand. And so you'll see people kind of chop away at this perineal nerve, peroneus nerve, excuse me, and they'll hit to try to deaden this leg. And if you research videos of perineal or peroneus nerve root kicks or MMA nerve root kicks, you'll see a number of fighters who will stand toe-to-toe with their opponent and just kick here in the attempt of deadening this to shut them down. Wicked strategy, brutal strategy, but it works. I left these in for you. Pretty good, pretty straightforward. But the big thing I want to get across is with the gastroc. If you notice, the gastroc crosses the knee joint. Okay, and notice where it originates from. It originates on the femur. If we go to the soleus does not. If that has test question written all over it, holy cow. So if you look at the soleus itself does not cross the knee joint. I'll kind of rip through this stuff, fibularis longus. I had a client one time who had some very, very noticeable discomfort up in this area where he had an inflammation, but he was also very tight over here in peroneus longus or fibularis longus. He played a ton of pickleball, so he was doing a lot of lateral work. You can just see where this muscle comes down around the ankle, and it's on the sole of the foot. You can see here, so as he's working and doing lateral type movements, he was aggravating this entire muscle because it was tight. So we had to do a lot of soft tissue work on fibularis longus for him, and he did derive relief from it. A little further down the chain, right? Fibularis brevis. So if there's a longus, you know there's a brevis. Notice the attachment point's a little bit different for brevis than longus. I'll leave this one in here, but it has a minimal type of effect. The book, I believe, denotes that you have a percentage of the population don't even have this muscle. Extensor digitorum longus. Now, take a note, right? When we talk about doing running technique stuff and doing dorsiflexion, these guys are the biggies. This, hallucis longus, and I want to point out now some of the verbiage, and I'll reinforce this later on. We have hallucis longus, digitorum longus, which should sound familiar to you. Tibialis anterior, this is another one where you work a ton of tibialis anterior when you get into dorsiflexion, but primarily with dorsiflexion, I'm trying to focus on hallucis longus, digitorum longus, and tib anterior. With tibialis posterior, a little different animal in terms of how it works, but that should be very apparent when you look at tibialis posterior versus tibialis anterior. And this is kind of the important part when you look at like where it inserts, right? It comes down, wraps around the medial side of the ankle, and attaches on the sole of the foot. So this is going to cause inversion and that supination. I'll let this kind of play through. When you look at digitorum longus, digitorum longus has the same thing. It attaches on the digits. Digitorum should be the giveaway that it's the metatarsals, like in the hand. Digitorum tells you it's the phalanges or the metacarpals. Let this one play out, and then we'll pause it right here.